Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show with myself, Councillor Puru, and co-host Councillor Andrew Ridd. So in this section, we're going to talk about growing Tower Hamlets. So the projected development or scale of development that's projected in Tower Hamlets. So I'm going to pass it over to Andrew. I know, Andrew, you've done some social media posts with some pictures, which a lot of people are talking about. So do you want to talk about that and also sort of like the projected numbers that are expected?
Yeah, so if you sort of look at my Twitter account, which is Andrew Wood 17, I've sort of done two tweets, one called Manhattan and one called Brooklyn, because what the council have done is they're working on something called a tall building supplementary planning document. But basically, they're using a 3D model. And what the 3D model shows, like a computer-generated image of what Tower Hamlets will look like in the future. And they've put into that model all of the sites with planning permission under construction that they know are coming. And what they've done rather unusually is they've also added sites which are not yet in progress, where nobody's got any specific plans for, and have done it in the color pink, because they kind of know or expect at some point those are the sites they're going to get built on. And they want to have a feel for what the area would look like if all of those developments do come forward. But it's also part of a process of trying to set the height of buildings, and what the council are trying to do is sort of do this, and the developers are trying to do this in terms of the height, and it's part of that sort of debate. But what it does clearly show you is what Tower Hamlets will look like in the future, and obviously even more tall buildings on the Isle of Dogs and Canary Wharf, but also in areas like Poplar and also along the Lee River and up to Stratford as well. And it is really striking, which is why I use the kind of, does this look like Manhattan or Brooklyn as a kind of example? And just to give you some numbers, so the population in sort of 2011 was about 200, for the whole of Tower Hamlets was about 250,000 people. We're already in 2021 about the 330,000 people. And I remember a few years ago having a conversation with a sort of very senior person in Poplar Harker, and we were trying to work out what the combined population of kind of the Poplar, Aberfeldy, Lansbury area was going to be, and then plus the Isle of Dogs. And we came to a population for the E14 postcode area of 250,000 people, which is the same number as the whole of Tower Hamlets Council was in 2015. And Tower Hamlets, of course, as well, because there are other growth areas, especially around Whitechapel and also on the city fringes as well. And we have targets. So the Mayor of London has basically issued a London plan recently. And he's basically said is that over the next 10 years, starting in 2019-20, is that we have to deliver 34,730 homes in those 10 years in Tower Hamlets as a whole. And then the council then issued a local plan last January. And that basically said over a slightly longer period of time, so over 15 years, is that the target is, well, depending on how you define it, is either 54,889 homes or 58,965 homes. So if you think that on average, we have two people living in each home on average, some more and some less, obviously, a target of 55,000 homes means 110,000 people in the next sort of 10 years from planned development. And the pictures kind of show where that development would be coming. And there are two more meetings next week for the Wapping and then the sort of the western part of the borough, which again I've advertised. So if you want to see what your area could look like, then I highly recommend trying to join one of those council organised meetings.
I've recently saw on the GLA have their own kind of data set as well, like the kind of planning development. I know Tom Copley, who's like the deputy mayor, tweeted it, which is interesting as well. So you could go there and have a look as well. So like London wide, so like how we fit in the picture. But it's gonna, this kind of scale of development is gonna have, although it's welcomed and will benefit in terms of infrastructure, in terms of council tax revenue as well. I know, so that was one of the arguments that was used at the call-in last night, saying that we don't have to make the same difficult decisions as other councils throughout the country because we're in a growth area. So our tax revenue is actually increasing So we could take slightly longer to take some of the difficult decisions, sort of ish, and the way our population is built. So there are benefits to it, but also my concern is that if it's not managed properly, it could cause a lot of disruption as well, and we could see inequality kind of like increase in the borough. And there are arguments, oh, inequality doesn't matter or inequality is good, but I do recommend there's a book called The Spirit Level, which actually talks about high levels of inequality actually has its own social issues within areas as well. And it's sort of like, but there's another book called Rebel Cities, which actually talks about these kind of issues of massive development in cities throughout the world, and the kind of problems, social problems and political problems that they cause on the ground. So that have we? Is there any discussion about how we manage it, or are we going to just have a laissez-faire approach in terms of the council?
So I'm probably not the best. The council will give you a completely different answer, but I feel sometimes it's very much a laissez-faire approach. We're very bad at delivering the infrastructure, and especially the social infrastructure to support this. But one of the really interesting questions for us, and obviously, this is all based on the assumption that London's growth continues, and that, basically employment growth continues in London, and people will still do at least some work in an office. And obviously that may completely change with COVID. We just don't know. And I think we'll find out this year. But if London's employment growth continues, and London has added about 1 million jobs in the last 10 years, if that were to continue, a lot of these new apartments will be filled by people from overseas, from other countries. And it's already very interesting to see in some of the new developments like London City Island, just how international the mix of people is in those developments. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens to people from Hong Kong now that they've been offered an easier path to living in the UK. Will we see a bigger, increasing Hong Kong population, given the fact that, the first Chinese community in the UK was in Limehouse about 160 years ago. So yeah, that's going to be very interesting to kind of see what, because if you think about Tower Hamlets, traditionally we've been the first home of immigrant communities, the Huguenots from France, and then the Jews from Eastern Europe, and then people from Bangladesh in the kind of 1970s onwards, and then more recently sort of Eastern Europeans. Will we see a fresh wave of immigrants, and will they come from all over the world, or will they come more from one particular area like some of the groups in the past? It's going to be very interesting to see how that happens over the next 10 years. And what these pictures show you is where those people will be moving to, which is mainly in the kind of south east of the borough, and then the west of the borough.
I think the other thing is I think it'll have an impact on the politics and the discussion, in the sense that we need to be less parochial, in the sense that with this level of investment, with this level of people moving in, there's going to be more attention paid to what happens in Tower Hamlets, especially with the Chinese embassy being here. I could see like a different kind of dynamic to Tower Hamlets in the sense that we in effect we become a city within a city. So, and it has its own dynamics. And if the Chinese embassy moves in, especially with the kind of good facilities in the Canary Wharf, government departments are moving in. I could see other diplomatic missions moving in to Tower Hamlets, and that has an impact. But we need to have discussions as well in the council and locally as well, as to how we sort of like welcome that, and how we sort of like integrate that, and what can we do to have maximum benefits for residents. It could be that we encourage residents to learn languages. It could be, I know we've cut the language service, but reform it again with a different purpose of trade, etc., engaging with this level of investment. So these kind of discussions need to be had, which I don't think strategically we're having. It just seems to be we're prodding along, and then something's happened. We have to react to it. So we're nearly at the end of the show. Andrew, apart from anything else interesting coming up in the cabinet next Wednesday, apart from the Inequality Commission?
There's a bunch of things sort of happening in cabinet. I'm just trying to remember what they all were. I think the main one is the one we've just been talking about, which is of the BME commission. There's a bunch of stuff about community buildings. Oh, the interesting one is the new intermediate housing policy. So basically, if you want to sort of shared ownership, so if you want to buy 25% of a affordable property, right now, sort of anybody kind of in the UK can kind of bid for those properties. So I think what they're proposing next week is that there would be like a 3-month window that the only people who could buy in the first 3 months of a shared ownership property going in the market would be people already living in Tower Hamlets. So that's kind of coming, and a bunch of other things. But in Tower Hamlets, there's always things happening which are interesting. So
no problems. Well, join us next week, guys. Thanks for listening. It's been a really interesting program, especially with Abdul coming in and just sharing his personal experience. Yeah. And it's something for me to think about, and for Andrew as well. Yeah. We to take to the cabinet meeting. But thanks for listening to us, guys, and join us next week for the weekly politics show every Friday, 7 p.m. with myself, Councillor Puru, and co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. But thank you again, and join us next week. Thank you.